Because the constitutional delegation of powers was written to be flexible, the lines between federal and state authority are often blurry, adapting to changing circumstances through the centuries. As a result, American federalism has evolved into complex relationships. In some cases, especially in areas where a problem is not contained by state borders, the national government imposes its will on the states. Sometimes the states comply willingly, and sometimes they raise strong objections. The Endangered Species Act grants the federal government the power to protect certain animals, and no species has gotten more attention than the gray wolves who were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park in central Idaho after a 60-year absence. In March 1995, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, along with the Park Service and environmental groups, brought a number of gray wolves into public lands in central Idaho to reestablish the species in their ancestral ranges. Ironically, it was the federal government which helped eliminate wolves from the area only 6 decades earlier.
Well, the federal government has a legal obligation to restore endangered species, and the wolf was one of the first species that was listed in the Endangered Species Act when it was passed in 1973. Looking at suitable habitat for them around the country, the biologists were able to determine that this area was one of the best places to restore them. Because there's less human conflict here, there's less people, mostly public lands that wolves are on, and their natural prey is still in abundance here.
The state of Idaho did not share in the enthusiasm over this homecoming. It raised vehement objections on the grounds that the people who lived in Idaho should have the right to decide what animals lived in their state. Ranchers and farmers who make their living in and around those lands argue that wolves pose a direct threat to their livelihood. And though there had never been a documented case of a wild wolf attacking humans in the United States, some legislators even worried that wolves were a threat to people.
I have friends in Alaska, when they send their children to school, they walk them to the bus and they go armed. Do I have to live like that in Idaho? Shouldn't have to. But just so somebody from out of state or back east or somebody that sits in an office all week and thinks wolves are cute and cuddly and how pretty. No, this is Idaho. And they don't have any right to visit those kinds of things onto my state.
Despite these objections, the wolves were released. And now the federal government expected the state to assume responsibility for managing them. State authorities, however, refused to accommodate what they saw as a federal abuse of power. They passed legislation demanding that the wolves be removed. Some threatened that they would have the wolves removed by any means necessary.
The federal agency, of course, they were the messengers, and so most of our people initially wanted to shoot the messengers, and there were some threats to do that physically, as you can imagine, when the wolves finally hit the earth and were turned loose, and then particularly when those wolves began to kill little calves and horse foals. There was, of course, outrage in the local communities, and there was a great deal of anger and animosity towards the federal administrators.
One such federal administrator is Carter Niemeyer, Wolf Recovery Coordinator for the Fish and Wildlife Service based in Idaho.
When there was a concern about wolves eating deer and elk and livestock, the state of Idaho didn't see a whole lot of things that looked really positive for their local residents. The problem you get into, again, when you deal with these type of issues is there's a large amount of federal land in Idaho that belong to all the citizens of the United States. And so it's difficult to explain to local residents who become very upset when they think someone in New York City is making decisions for them. But in reality, the issue is when there's public lands involved that all the citizens in the United States are going to have a say in this whole thing.
The federal government had Idaho over a barrel. As long as wolves remained on the endangered species list, Federal restrictions on how to deal with these animals had to be followed. This meant that local ranchers had very little recourse in protecting their livestock from the predators. The wolves would not be removed from the list even if the population reached the recovery goal until the state developed its own wolf management plan, one that would not only keep the wolves away from livestock, but would ensure that the wolf population remained at healthy levels. State officials began to realize that their hands were tied and they would have to deal with these new residents.
Under the Endangered Species Act, there is no choice. You must work with the law, you must work within the law, and whenever there is a clash, a direct clash, state and local interest will lose. It's that fundamental. So there really was no choice. And eventually people were educated, they learned. You know, we all learned about biology as well as about government, and that brought us to where we are today in Idaho.
Who's going to be out there to know when we drop below that level? Because when we drop below that level, if the Forest Service gods decide, or the Fish and Wildlife gods decide we've dropped, we go back on the list. It is a never-ending problem. And the only way it will be resolved is to remove the wolves. We got along with it. It was done before. It was done for a reason. People and wolves will not coexist. So I think we'll head down that road again when people wake up. And if the people back east don't like it, quite frankly, they can go suck eggs.
There will still be ongoing challenges by rural residents who aren't going to accept that wolves are here. But more and more people who live in Idaho have come to the realization that we tried to prevent wolves from being reintroduced in this state, but they are here now. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that we're going to have to live with this decision now. We can't go back. We probably won't go back. So now the issue is, as wolf managers, how are we going to make this work with the best interest of all of the different people involved, and try to find some kind of a way that we can all live together with wolves, because we're going to have to.